Alrighty, so a lot of people have been jumping into the Bone Spirit Necromancer because the thing's an absolute powerhouse, but what you might be personally experiencing is a bit of squishiness that I really wanted to address. I tend to run the vast majority of my builds pretty glass cannon, unless they're like naturally incredibly tanky, something like Blight that just has permanent uptime on Bone Storm, etc. due to lucky hit chance. I tend to just go, if I died, let me just make sure I have all my res and all my DR and my armor in the way. And if I'm still dying, it's probably because I'm bad. I play on controller. This build is very, very target specific, but I wanted to make it so that people who do want to enjoy playing the build and were feeling that squishiness had a tool, had an opportunity. And I think I came up with a pretty awesome non-mythic unique answer to the build's squishiness or perceived squishiness. So I wanted to share that with you. This is basically the exact same build that you're already seeing on max roll. I don't have a Shaco, so I am still using a legendary helmet. I do think that there are pros and cons to using each one of them, but not having a Shaco opens up very specifically the aspect of shielding storm to be an option. And then it took almost 2 years, but we got there. I found an end game version to use Osius Gale, not just as a meme, not just for quality of life, but to basically make you unkillable. So let's go ahead and talk about the differences in this build from what you're already seeing on max roll, the concessions that you have to make, and kind of the gear stat requirements that you need to be able to make this work. But oddly enough, swapping over to the tankier version of this build actually makes your gear requirements significantly easier to manage. I also want to talk about one little part of the gameplay loop that I'm not necessarily seeing click with everybody, that I think will go a long way to make just the overall experience of playing the game significantly better for the vast majority of people. So what you're currently looking at is a tier 7 Infernal Horde done solo. Now, it's very easy for me to, kind of sound like a whiner or a complainer. I do think that there's something very off about the scaling of on-death effects, on-ground effects, just the insane amount of crowd control. Now, Infernal Hordes can be hard, but depending on the type of monsters you get, most notably snakes, basically you are stunned 100% of the time, and it doesn't matter if you were even Infinimist, you're gonna get caught at some point. But that being said, outside of all of those excuses, I wanted to show me soloing this, again, especially on controller, doing a tier 7. Did I run it particularly well? No. Am I optimized for Infernal Horde? Also no. I think that once we have a better idea of how this game mode really works and how builds need to click in or lock in to be able to min-max their efficiency in them, the stats and tempers are going to start to get pretty different, and I think people are going to really be looking for an armory feature sooner rather than later. Sorry, Blizzard, but you keep putting in great content that wishes I could easily swap my builds. But now, again, let's just very quickly touch on the differences between this build and the normal build that you might see running around or you might be using yourself at this point, and the gear requirements that you need to hit to make it really work. One stat that my gear is currently missing that would make all of this a lot easier is cooldown reduction. I don't have cooldown reduction on my focus, and I don't have cooldown reduction on my helmet. Ideally, I would want the helmet to say maximum resource, essence per second, and cooldown reduction. And for the offhand, I would want to say maximum resource, critical strike chance, and cooldown reduction. Without those two stats, without GAs, without masterworking on them, you're going to have to try to work a lot harder to make the build function well. I just haven't found these gear pieces with these stats on them, so even though I have almost triple masterworked on a pretty good ring, my gear is, I would say, somewhere around the 50th percent. So if we were to take like 0% is trash, 100% is triple GA, perfect stuff, I'm somewhere around 50% here right now, just to give you an understanding of what your gear might need to look like. But because we don't have cooldown reduction, basically what we needed to do was find a way to have permanent uptime on Bone Storm. Bone Storm comes along with a ton of obvious benefits. 1, 15% damage reduction. 2, we can then use Shielding Storm, which was buffed in this season to work with maximum life, meaning if you're like me with almost 52,000 maximum life, using a maximum life elixir, you're going to get 52,000 barrier. That's doubling your effective health. That's incredibly strong. But the question was, how do you accomplish that, especially if you don't have cooldown reduction like I don't? Well, Osius Gale was an obvious fix for that. Adding on the additional 12.5 seconds means that we have Bone Storm up for 22.5 seconds. That means I need to chop off a whopping 37 seconds to be able to cast this again. And while you can be a little bit more stingy with when you actually cast the skill to get the benefits of it, I wanted it to be foolproof. I wanted people to be able to have it up 100% of the time. The other benefit of 100% uptime on Bone Storm is the 20% crit chance that you get from it. meaning that you don't need nearly as much crit chance on your gear. Like right now I have 69.7, nice, % crit chance on just my gear. I have bone crit chance on my ring, and I have bone crit chance on my weapon. I actually don't need those stats at all. You'll also notice I even pulled out more stats from Serration because oddly enough, 100% uptime of 20% crit chance helps to really narrow down that gap of having 100% uptime on the bonus as opposed to not. But with OCA scale being able to eat a ton of corpses, which is also like a little bit nice to be able to help generate essence from Grim Harvest. It also gets Flesh Eater activated. We don't really care about that so much, but it's just that pure time on Bone Storm, which again allows you to rock the incredibly powerful barrier generation from Bone Storm. Okay, great. That's the tool. You might notice something though, we don't have Blood Mist on our skill bar. You do just have to dodge. I did try out just legendary boots with Metamorphosis on it for Unstoppable, and while that definitely worked, the sacrifice of losing out on having the additional Bone Prison, meaning that the additional essence from our Requiem aspect, on top of that, the Bone Splinters firing twice to get us even more maximum essence, you could really feel the decrease in overall damage output and survivability and just general function and quality of life. Infernal Hordes, you need to do a lot of damage in a really big area, and without these boots on, just casting a regular Bone Prison, I just can't go back to this. So while you can personally put on Metamorphosis for Unstoppable, I just showed you gameplay where we just didn't need it at all. You just gotta play a little bit smarter. But let me go ahead and explain how you actually manage to cut off 37 seconds of the cooldown of Bone Storm so that you have it up 100% of the time. All of this kind of feeds into a couple bugs that I don't think people necessarily have a full understanding of when it comes to rapid ossification. For people who don't know, rapid ossification says for every 100 essence that you spend, if you have 3 points in it, you can get even more on tempers on your rings. You'll reduce bone skill cooldowns by 1.5 seconds. When I cast my Bone Spirit as a 12-second cooldown, and I tend to have just about 300 maximum essence when I cast it. In fact, even more. I tend to have around 420 maximum essence, nice. But the idea is, even on this 200 essence, I should be reducing the cooldown of Bone Spirit by 3 seconds. I've spent 2 total counts of 100% essence. Let's go ahead and cast Bone Spirit. You'll notice that the cooldown started right at 12 down into 11. I did not reduce the cooldown at all. But the funny part about this is that it's actually a bug that I've covered in the past. It turns out that the game knows that you spent all of that essence, it just hasn't seen a spend essence event yet, and that's mostly because Bone Spirit's just kind of weird. But you know what we have on our skill bar that can spend essence? Well, that's Decrepify. Let's go ahead and look at the cooldown of Bone Spirit as I spam Decrepify. Bone Spirit's out, I cast Decrepify 1 time, cooldown goes down, and then cooldown goes down again, and then again, and then again. Why is that happening? There's something very weird about how rapid ossification kind of stores how much essence you spent on Bone Spirit, and how it then seeks to see a trigger event for you spending essence to basically roll out that cooldown reduction. So in casting Bone Spirit, even at only 200 essence, I can then spam Decrepify multiple times and completely reset the cooldown of all 12 seconds before that Bone Spirit even hits a target. Now, just for Bone Spirit itself, this is going to help speed it out more quickly, and you are going to be able to cast it more often. But it's how this interacts with every single Bone Spirit that becomes incredibly important. I'm going to cast Bone Storm, I'm going to cast Bone Spirit, and I'm going to cast Decrepify a couple times. Alright, great. So you'll notice there, and this is very interesting, we only got like 1 to 2 cooldown procs. Basically, it's kind of inconsistent. I don't know how else to describe it. The exact math of it escapes me. It either is permanently spamming and just reducing cooldown, only reducing cooldown a couple times, but basically what you end up doing is in between casting Bone Spirit and Bone Prison and then casting Decrepify, you can reduce all of these cooldowns simultaneously. So what you'll notice in the gameplay, and I guess I'll just jump back over to that, every single time that I cast Bone Spirit, you might notice me casting Decrepify, cursing the same targets multiple times. And I promise it's not just because I like doing multiple inputs here, or that I'm just kind of wasting my time. Look at all of the cooldowns across the bottom of my skill bar. The Bone Prison cooldown is coming down significantly faster. The Bone Spirit cooldown is coming down significantly faster. And on top of that, every single cast of Bone Spirit gets me 1 to 3 reductions in cooldown on Bone Storm itself. And that's how we're able to basically cheat out a bunch of additional cooldown on the build. My Bone Storm, which I have a total of, remember, it adds on 12.5 seconds. I have 22.5 seconds to cast as many Bone Spirits as I possibly can, reducing the cooldown of Bone Storm multiple times, as well as Bone Prison multiple times. So like, I'll cast it, and I'll cast Bone Prison, and I'll cast Decrepify a whole bunch, and then that cut basically like half the time off of the Bone Prison, and then I'm able to cast the Bone Spirit again, which would have already reset its cooldown by hitting a target, which lets me cast the Bone Prison again, etc., etc. Casting Bone Spirit to be like a cooldown battery through Decrepify for your other bone skills, which then get you more essence, survivability, barrier, cooldown reduction, corpse consumption, which gets you the essence, which lets you cast the Bone Spirit, which lets you spam cast the Bone Prison, which gets you the maximum essence and the essence needed to cast the Bone Spirit, is this weird kind of loop-de-loop of positive feedback, where each one feeds into the other one, making them all more efficient to then speed out the other ones as well. So that's Bone Spirit. The kind of interesting thing about this build is that it is, by and large, without question, the strongest Necromancer build, arguably, that's ever existed outside of, like, the Barber Heart. And even then, the damage numbers that we're seeing back then really didn't kind of compare to the top end of what we're seeing here. The very funny part about that, though, is that a lot of people who have been recently enamored with the Necromancer based off of the minion changes, who might have found that Necromancer is now the character that they want to play, are getting a very different experience in playing Bone Spirit than they did playing the minion build. It basically requires like no gear, no real technical know-how. There's a huge skill cap for like when you would be the best at playing the build, how much more you can get out of it. But most people are having a pretty easy ride enjoying the power. Bone Spirit is arguably one of the most technically involved and complex Necromancer builds due to this interwoven intricacy between all of these different skills and how they kind of work together. Oddly enough, playing Infernal actually really prepared me for a build like this, where you are already kind of understanding that each one of your cooldowns kind of nets you a little bit of time until you can get the next one going. So the barrier from the Bone Storm gets me enough survivability to reach out the actual cooldown of the Corpse Tendrils, which then gets me the safety to be able to properly cast the Bone Spirit, which then lets me reset my cooldowns on Bone Storm. Then I get to cast the Bone Prison, which gains me more safety until my Bone Storm's back up. Then I regain the barrier. You're kind of jumping between each one of these different systems and the survivability and crowd control and overall utility that they enable you to basically tap into, so that you can buy yourself time to do the next thing. And I think that with more time, becoming more comfortable with the build and understanding how interwoven it is and how complex it is, you will come to have a much better experience playing and piloting the build in general. I'm going to go ahead and get off of my soapbox. I just kind of want to get that idea out there. I didn't have a really good like single video to put that into, but it's something that I've been really noodling about walking into this season, where a lot of people haven't been playing Bone Spirit since Season 0, which has basically just been my favorite build. And I've just been desperately waiting for it to be good enough to actually play it in the modern meta. And I'm glad that people are experiencing it, because it really shows a level of depth and intricacy that exists in the Necromancer class that's kind of hard to see elsewhere, because most other things you kind of just hold down right click and you spam your cast and then the things die. Here, you got to know what's going on, and I think if you really sat down, spent time becoming a lot more conscious of those cooldowns and how you can manipulate them, what's required to get them there, you'll probably have a much better time. Thank you so much for watching this video. I truly hope that it helps. I hope it vastly improves your survivability. If you really, really, really hate losing the Blood Mist, I'm sorry. You just kind of have to. I think on this build, the amount of power that you get from Path of Trigul and Bone Prison makes it basically unremovable from the skill bar. You're going to want to have this. You're going to want to have this. But yeah, look forward to me continuing to tinker with this in the future. Hopefully I can get like an Infernal Hordes optimized version of the build or variant up on the build guide within the next couple days. I'd like to be able to push to max tier on my gear and then max tier in the Horde, so I can bring you the best information possible. But again, thank you so much for watching this video. I truly, truly hope that helps. I look forward to seeing you in the next one.